Thank you, Frodo's. That's still a circuit diagram. That's another circuit diagram, it looks like. Okay, now where? I think I've already been there. That's the most attractive because that light has the most contrast. That's a weenie, but this is such a path. Let me see if there's anything down here. Oh god, I can go into the water. Oh god. Oh no, what's happened? I'm
Come back.
Drowning. Oh my god, that's like a fail state. Holy shit, that was wild. I did not expect that I could walk off the edge of a pier and drown. And revert to an autosave. Is that colored yellow? Like gold? Interesting. Toby asks, do you feel on rails playing this, or do you feel like you are really moving around with your own purpose? I guess more on rails. Oh, now I have come back. Okay, so this was a big explorable space. Because this is where I was. I walked by this tent. Okay, gotcha. And this is not leading me in another direction, is it? No. Okay, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to see if there was another way for me to go. I'm in an interesting moment to ask this question, Toby, because for the first time in the game, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go next. The game has been very leading up until now. And I would say that I feel it is more on rails than not. But I do, in that it has been really resistant to me sort of wandering off of the path, going the wrong way in general. But I feel like picking the path, there's a version, so On Rails suggests to me a version of the game that is on rails in a more traditional sense of sort of moving me along, right, without direct input. And I think this game would feel very, very, very different if I was not controlling the movement. Even though I do feel like it is more on rails than not. Wait, did I go through here? Now I'm lost. How did I get lost in an on-rails game? Yes, I have been through here. Okay, so Toby clarifies. Is the choice / direction it's giving you the way you already feel you want to go? Most of the time, yes. I feel like when I say that this game is leading me, what I mean by that is the game has constructed a path and an environment that suggests moving in a certain direction. And also, but separately, right? This is actually two different things. It is also fencing me in so that path is the only way that I can go, right? You can do either one of those independently. You can create, and this is sort of a very Rails thing, you can fence in a path so that path is the only way that the player can go, without making the player necessarily feel like they want to go that way. Like you can sort of, that does not feel great as a player. You can also create an open world where the player can move in lots of different directions, but an environment that is suggestive of a particular path, and makes the player tend to move in a direction. This game is doing both. This game is, mostly, like, again, it also places these sort of like crossroads and little more open spots in a really interesting way. Like, it feels much less linear now than it did in the first half hour, where it really felt like there was only one path. Now it feels like, eventually there is an exit to the area that I'm in, and I'm going to go that way. Is that Esther? I can't really tell who that is. But it feels much less like, this is the only way for you to go. But yes, in general, this game is using level design techniques to create attractive paths, like ways that the player sort of wants to go. And so it doesn't feel... It's only if you sort of buck against that you get into... okay, well, you are actually fenced into that. You're not allowed to go anywhere else. Was there... Okay, so this is clearly, like, related to the car accident. Is there some, like, ghostly... There totally is. This feels haunted. Like, all of a sudden this game got, like, real haunted. The sound design is truly incredible.
There were chemical stains on the tarmac, the leak of air conditioning, brake fluid and petrol. He kept sniffing at his fingers as he sat by the roadside, waiting as if he couldn't quite understand or recognize their smell. He said he'd been travelling back from a sales conference in Exeter. He'd stopped for farewell drinks earlier, but had kept a careful eye on his intake. You could hear the sirens above the idling traffic.
From... A light from heaven shone around him. So this is Donnelly talking in the third person. Our character Donnelly talking in the third person about himself after the accident, creating a protective distance between himself and the person who was there.
From here, I can see my armada. I collected all the letters I'd ever meant to send to you, if I'd have ever made it to the mainland, but had instead collected at the bottom of my rucksack, and I spread them out along the lost beach. Then I took each and every one, and I folded them into boats. I folded you into the creases, and then, as the sun was setting, I set the fleet to sail. Shattered into 21 pieces, I consigned you to the Atlantic, and I sat here until I'd watched all of you sink.
I mean, that's just such a cool imagery. Jesus. I didn't think it was going to let me actually come down here. Can I go into this water? I bet I can. Nope, drowned again. Okay.
Come back.
I mean, is this a suicide note? Is this whole island... What is the outcome of this? What is the aerial? What is the point of it? What does it represent? On a sudden, a light from heaven shone around him, and he fell to the ground. And eggs. Interesting, eggs. Okay, so Toby mentioned that the field of view is a little weird, which I agree. I also noticed. Toby's drawing a connection between that and feeling drunk, which I did not make that connection, but I think that is legitimate. I think that this sort of like there's a fish-eyedness to this. I don't know if my mouse sensitivity is set really high or if the game has it tuned really high, but there's definitely sort of a like staggering effect that comes out of that.
A sound of torn metal, teeth running over the edge of the rocks, a moon that casts a signal as I lay pinned beside you, the ticking of the cooling engine, and the calling from a great height, all my mind as a bypass.
We have seen the aerial. At the beginning of the game, the aerial was way off in the distance, and it was sort of clear, like Journey, you know, this is our eventual destination. And he has mentioned it before as sort of like, you know, where we're going. But yeah, obviously underground. Okay, so I can't get over to that guy. So who is that? Tell me, Donnelly. Who is the figure standing on the cliff?
I've begun my voyage in a paper boat without a bottom. I will fly to the moon in it. I've been folded along a crease in time, a weakness in the sheet of life. Now you've settled on the opposite side of the paper to me. I can see your traces in the ink that soaks through the fiber, the pulped vegetation. When we become waterlogged and the cage disintegrates, we will intermingle. When this paper aeroplane leaves the cliff edge and carves parallel vapor trails in the dark, we will come together.
This is where the figure was. Right? I'm pretty sure. Yeah, clearly. I mean, that's a nice trick of just forcing you to leave view and then switching out the model, but it's very sort of like creepy and mysterious, and as he was proceeding on his journey. All of the interweaving of narrative threads, I feel like, does a lot to make this feel rich, like narratively rich. There's a lot of that I don't think the sort of poetic nature of the narration would do on its own. And was come near to Damascus. I'm assuming that all of this is biblical verse. It's got sort of that ring to it. Oh, look at that color shift.
If
Holy
only
shit.
Donnelly had experienced this, he would have realized he was his own shoreline, as am I. Just as I am becoming this island, so he became his syphilis, retreating into the burning synapses, the stones, the infection.
Maybe Donnelly, because he is definitely placing Donnelly in time in like the 1700s, so maybe it is that's literally just ghosts going woo, woo, woo. Wow. It's very good. It's very good sound design. Now I'm thinking that Donnelly is like an ancestor, is a character who is that he has a personal familial relationship to.
Too long in the tunnels of my island without a bottom. The sea creatures have risen to the surface, but the gulls are not here to carry them back to their nests. I've become fixed, open and staring, an eye turned on itself. I've become an infected leg whose tracking lines form a perfect map of the junctions of the M5. I will take the exit at mid-thigh and plummet to my Esther.
Jesus Christ. And I came to Cast East? That as a... I can't quite read that. Is this... Oh, shit, yes. Now we're mixing... I think that is the electrical engineering, and I don't know what that is, but that was also some kind of other symbol, and it's sort of gotten melded into the chemistry, like it's all part of one molecule, all of these different systems of writing, all of these different languages. And it came to pass that as I made my journey... I'm going to look up there. As I made my journey and was come a light no, I lost it. I don't know. Whew. That's a good sense of height. This is okay, so there's a cool tension here of to read this, a great light round about. To read this, I want to back up, right? And I don't have quite the like physical sense of, you know, embodiment to know exactly where the edge of the cliff is, but I know that there's a cliff edge there.
He was not drunk at all. He had not drunk with Donnelly or spat Jakobsen back at the sea. He had not careered across the lost shores and terminal beaches of this nascent archipelago. He did not intend his bonnet to be crumpled like a spent tissue by the impact. His windscreen was not star-studded all over like a map of the heavens. His paintwork etched with circuit diagrams, strange fish to call the gulls away. The phosphorescence of the skid marks lighting the M5 all the way from Exeter to Damascus.
I mean, this is terrifying. The audio is now, like, consuming me. I'm on the edge of my seat. This is built to a climax in, like, a really, really effective
I've run
way.
out of places to climb. I will abandon this body and take to the air. Dear Esther, I have burnt my belongings, my books, this death certificate. Mine will be written all across this island. Who was Jakobsen? Who remembers him? Donnelly has written of him, but who was Donnelly? Who remembers him? I have painted, carved, hewn, scored into this space all that I could draw from him. There will be another to these shores to remember me. I will rise from the ocean like an island without bottom, come together like a stone, become an aerial, a beacon, that they will not forget you. We have always been drawn here. One day the gulls will return and nest in our bones and our history. I will look to my left and see Esther Donnelly flying beside me. I will look to my right and see Paul Jakobsen flying beside me. They will leave white lines carved into the air to reach the mainland, where help will be sent.
White lines carved into the air. Are we falling or flying? Wow. Come back, come back. Come back, Esther. Ooh. A light from heaven shone around him. The bird shadow you occasionally glimpse. Yeah. Cool.
Come back.
Does it end on come back? Interesting. Credits over silence. I mean, that's bracing after how rich the soundscape has been. Wow. Cool. Cool. Yeah, I mean, really, really effective in what it is doing. That's super neat. That's super neat. Okay, so, masterclass in level design and environment design. Like, those environments are gorgeous, just beautiful, just like traversing them, moving through them is lovely and effective. Like, some of them are spooky, some of them are are downright terrifying. Some of them are sort of like hauntingly beautiful. Some of them feel like cold and lonely. The audio design is stunning, is like really incredible. And then the writing, I think, is really good. Is just really high quality. It's really effective at sort of telling this story in a way that is not at all straightforward. For someone like me, I am not a writer, and it seems like an astounding challenge to take the story that this game is telling and transform it into that narration, that actual text, is really quite incredible. And I think the things that it is doing are in the poetry of its language, which is often sort of confusing and ambiguous, but also often striking. Like, there are phrases and metaphors, there are themes that are sort of woven into the language of it that are, when they hit you really hard. And a lot of the rest of that poetry, I think, is designed to be difficult to parse, right? It is hard to sort of really keep track of what's going on and put the pieces together. That's a big part of, I think, how the puzzly nature of it works, is that it's just, it is not forthright. It's not straightforward about what is it actually saying. And then the second thing that it's doing is weaving together these characters that overlap. And I think that Donnelly there is no other Donnelly. I think where I am landing as somebody, as the audience interpreting this, is that Donnelly is the narrator, but has externalized himself to such an extent that the sort of projected Donnelly character is treated very much as another person, and is treated as a person that is sort of unanchored in time and space. And the Donnelly's writings is really interesting. Like, a lot of the narrator is largely interacting with Donnelly through Donnelly's writings. And I don't know if those are literal. I don't know if that's stuff that the character himself wrote at some point and is reflecting on, or if it's part of the externalization of this other part of themselves that was there at the scene of the accident that caused Esther's death. It's not possible to sort of speak directly to that part, but they can sort of read messages that externalized character sends or something. I mean, it is left very ambiguous, right? There is clearly a character of Jacobson and clearly a character of Esther, and those two are not directly connected. They're connected through the character of Donnelly, who sometimes appears to have lived in the 1700s and been a contemporary of Jacobson, sometimes appears to have lived at some point in the intervening centuries as a historian of some kind, sometimes appears to have lived in modern time as sort of the person who was there when Esther died, but is really maybe none of those, is really just the narrator sort of who is recreating a real place. I get the sense that this island is his personal sort of imaginative recreation of a real place where Jacobson was a real historical figure, I think. But yeah, I mean, it plays a lot with ambiguity. Like, ambiguity is a tool that it wields effectively. And that comes to a head, I think, in that ending of jumping off of the aerial and for a long time really being unclear whether we were falling or flying. And I think that's very deliberate. I mean, that is bluntly wielded ambiguity. But I think that throughout the game, the story of it, the narrative of it, is using ambiguity to sort of, in the same way that it uses level design to show you carefully constructed views of things in the distance. I think it's using the ambiguity in the language to show you sort of little glimpses of the story of what's really going on. Really, really, really cool. Toby says, unlike deliberately obtuse words-only poetry, though, having this whole exquisite layered space around it makes it easier, at least watching, to just let it wash over and trust it'll land somewhere. There's anchors to hold on to, things to appreciate. You don't just feel ignorant and confused. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that if you were to put this text in front of me as text, I mean, I would probably do it much the same, of sort of like reading through paragraphs and kind of bouncing off of them, and but probably continuing and getting to a place where I could hold on to things. That's what it felt like to play the game. It felt to play the game. I think okay, all right, let me say this. A major strength of the game is its linearity. That more like a movie than a book, you don't have a real option to go back and try to reread a passage that doesn't quite make sense. Which is an experience that I certainly have reading, where my eyes will sort of glaze over something, especially something that is very poetic or obscured, and realize, like, I don't know what that just said. I don't understand what is going on here, and go back and reread that paragraph again and again and again, try to glean some meaning from it. And I think that this is a game where it's not that there isn't meaning there to be had, but it's a game, it's a poetry, it's a narrative that knows it doesn't benefit from that kind of analysis, that it is better suited to be a movie than a book, because, you know, in a movie, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to interact. You don't need to, there is no action on your part required for the film to progress, as opposed to a book or text where you have to read the next word in order for that to happen. And I think that making it a game is sort of a fascinating formal commentary on giving the audience back a measure of interaction that, in a lot of ways, even playing it feels akin to the interaction of reading a book, right? Like, I don't want to dive too deep into this because it's just boring, but like when you are in grad school and you're talking about what is interactivity, what does it mean? Things that come up are, is a painting interactive? Because as a person who observes it, you need to sort of interpret it, right? Is that the act of interpreting, of sort of seeing and understanding and responding internally to a painting, is that interaction? What about a book where you have to physically act on it in order for it to progress, in order for it to do the thing that it is doing, to be the art that it is, to be read? You have to actively read it. Does that count as interaction? Whatever, who cares? But I think that like there are, at some level, this game feels like a dark ride that you have to read, right? Like there's not a lot of, you're not making choices. The extent of the choices that you're making are sort of like, am I going to read this paragraph again? How long am I going to stay standing here in this environment, looking around at different things, trying to read the writing on the wall before I move to the next area, right? Before I continue the dark ride. That feels a lot like turning pages in a book, like that level of interaction. But unlike a book, the bits of it that are narrative, that are textual, the narration, that the poetry of it, is not, I don't have control over that. That just happens, and I can't go back and reread it. And if I miss it or I don't understand it, I have no choice but to just keep going, which benefits the game, benefits the story, I think, because it's not, it wants to use that sort of obscurity and obtuseness and ambiguity in language to create an atmosphere, not to create sort of like a dense linguistic puzzle for you to sort out. I don't think it would benefit from reading and rereading the same paragraph. I think it benefits from just sort of moving through it. And frankly, as Kyla pointed out, like not stopping to listen to the narration like a cutscene, but really to let it wash over you as you move through the space, and let the space wash over you too, right? That those things are experienced in much the same way as kind of as almost a gestalt, as almost just sort of like a feeling that you are moving through, and some of it is visual and some of it is textual, and some of it is audio, right? The audioscape is the same thing. I think it really sort of challenges some ideas of what is interactivity for when you're telling a story, and then it is also beautiful. It just sort of is independently beautiful and well crafted, and sort of like, and a beautiful synthesis of these different media. Kyla says, I'm trying to remember on my own playthrough whether I thought the writing was clear enough to not be frustrating, but I don't remember. Guess I'll have to go back and listen to the podcast to find out. There's also some clarity to the metaphors presented in the space. It's not wholly independent of the text. That is true. It's not wholly reflective of the text, and sometimes sort of it felt like I was searching for connection between the text and the landscape, but they are not wholly independent. There are moments of connection between them. For instance, the highway, back to Kyla, the highway at the bottom of the cave, the candle shrines in front of the pieces of broken car and hospital equipment, etc. So those help the text feel less ambiguous. No, totally. I think that's very true. And there are like, there were moments of revelation in the narrative. And specifically for me, just playing it, it's sort of, I come to understand Esther as somebody who is involved in a drunk driving accident. And then there is a revelation that I, the narrator, was the one driving the car. And that felt like that felt unambiguous. That felt sort of like a connecting dots. Like, a lot of this ambiguity is being utilized to set up a scene that is a little bit out of focus, so that then it can be brought into sharp focus. And for me, that was a moment of like, oh shit, I killed her. And then the other was when she's referred to as Esther Donnelly for the first time, and realizing that, like, oh shit, Donnelly's not just some other person. Donnelly's not just some sort of historical figure. Donnelly means something much more than that. And the only way for Esther to have that name, really, is for me to have that name. Like, I must be Donnelly or related to Donnelly or something. And then, that is sort of in its ambiguous way fleshed out, so that it's not entirely clear what all of that relationship is. But there is this sort of revelatory moment of, oh God, I had misinterpreted or oversimplified what these relationships are. It's very cool. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, Kyla says, I wonder how different this game would be without voice narration if you had to actually read the text instead of just hearing it. I feel like it would be a much more frustrating, less fluid experience. Yeah, I think that for the reasons that I was just trying to express, I 100% agree. I think that the narration, the voice narration, is designed in a way that it washes over you, right? It makes it fluid. It makes it so that you cannot get stuck on it, that you sort of have a moment to absorb it, and you absorb what you can, and you keep moving. And there's really no other way to interact with it. And I think that if it was text, that would feel very different. It would feel challenging in a way that, and not that this isn't challenging, this is clearly challenging, but it would feel more like a puzzle. And this, the whole game has a sort of a puzzle feel to it, but any individual passage, I mean, honestly, the first 3 passages, the first 3 moments of narration, I felt like I was in trouble because I was not following what the hell was going on. I didn't understand it, and I was really worried that I'm off to a bad start. I'm not going to understand any of this. It's not going to make any sense. I missed something important. The fact that it doesn't let you go back, the only way to handle that is to say, okay, well, I'm just going to try to pay attention next time. And trying to pay attention next time doesn't really help, because that's not the problem. But it does sort of put you more into a mindset of just let this happen. Just sort of experience it. And don't try to understand what every individual sentence means. Yeah, Toby says, just reading text would make me want to take notes, which would not be an ideal a way to go about playing. That's a great way of putting it, right? The way that this game is set up, it doesn't feel like it makes sense to take notes. If you were to do that, because you could, there's no reason why you couldn't take notes of this version based on the audio track, but that would bad for the experience. That would not be sort of helpful to how you are meant to experience it. And I think if it was written out text, the temptation to do that would be higher, and that would be bad for the experience. Yeah, cool. Interesting. How does this compare to what I expected? It doesn't. I mean, again, so now that I'm done, it really doesn't feel old, except I guess in that this kind of story okay, so the main character who has sort of created an island in order to house the traumatic memory of the drunk driving accident that killed his wife, as a premise, does feel of its time. 2009, 2011 feels closer to Braid and Papoyo and Lost than today does. In 2021, I feel like we've moved a little bit beyond that moment of indie game / pop culture, I guess. Which isn't to say, I mean, it doesn't feel old in that, like, if this game were produced this year, I don't think it would feel like it was some kind of a throwback. But I do think there was a moment in time when this kind of story, this kind of premise, was really very in the air in a way that is less true today. And so this does feel like, in that respect, it is it's from its time. But in terms of like how that story gets told and what the game is and the walking simulator of it, I mean, I think it maybe it was so controversial because it was not really compromising in how it did that. And I think that because of that, I mean, I do think that has evolved to a certain extent. And you look at Gone Home, and Gone Home has a different sort of set of mechanics. The sort of inspection, the environmental narrative of it is much more important and focused. You look at Tacoma and Firewatch, and they behave a little bit differently, but not so differently that like a game like this that was produced today would feel terribly out of place. And a lot of what this game is doing, I think, is really couched in the fundamentals of good practice for level design, for sound design, for sort of creating an environment that is really compelling, and then matching it with a narrative. I think if you create an environment that is this compelling to move through, then that is more timeless than it is rooted in a particular moment. And Kyla is 100%. So Kyla says it was maybe controversial because there's nothing you can do other than move. Most modern walking simulators nowadays have something you can do, at least pick things up, etc. No, that's true. That's a good point. This is this remains sort of pure in that it doesn't make more verbs accessible to you. I'm really curious to play some of the other games that I feel like are more direct successors, like Edith Finch, like Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. I sort of really want to play those now in order to get a sense of, because there is this game. There is Stanley Parable. There is this sort of like, there's Gone Home and Tacoma. I feel like there is a line of games or a field of games that is related to Stanley Parable and Gone Home, that is sort of descendant of Dear Esther, that is sort of, and Vanishing of Ethan Carter, right? These games that I have not played and I don't have a great sense. And then there's, Minerva's Den, BioShock 2 DLC that I also haven't played, that is also related, I think, but in a different way. And it is certainly not sort of trying to recreate Dear Esther, or at least that's the impression that I get. Beginner's Guide, I think, is sort of, yes, certainly Beginner's Guide has a relationship to Dear Esther, as much as it has a relationship to Stanley Parable. Beginner's Guide is interesting and is doing some other things as well. That was a hell of a game. But yes. Anyway, it is clear that Dear Esther sparked sort of something that was in the air in that time, in the late 2000s, the early 2010s, but that it also sort of really forged a path. And I think it was controversial because it was, it is really uncompromising. It is what it is. It is not anything else. And it sort of demands to be played on its own terms, and not using the language of other games. And a lot of the successors to this, at least looking at Gone Home, something like that, is maybe, or Firewatch, it is a little bit more compromised. It is, which isn't bad. Those are great games. They are also evolved, but they are taking some of the stuff that Dear Esther does in sort of how it is telling a story linearly through walking and exploring a space or traversing a space, and cutting that with mechanics that are otherwise familiar to other genres of games, that make it feel a little bit more like an RPG or an adventure game or an immersive sim, even if it is mostly a walking simulator. And that's pretty cool. I mean, it's pretty cool that like this game, as far back as it goes, sort of could be a lot of formal changes, a lot of sort of genre creation happens by a game that is mostly like other games, but a little bit different, that takes sort of a little bit of a different tack, or includes or focuses on a feature that is a little bit different, that is like sort of a clear evolution away from where you can see a branching in how these different genres evolve. And Dear Esther doesn't really feel like that. Dear Esther feels like here is something that is what it is. And other games are going to define themselves in relation to that, as well as the other things that they have roots in, rather than sort of evolving directly from it. I don't know if that's a meaningful distinction, but I think that there is something very cool about what this game did in and of itself at its time. I'm very impressed by that. Dragon question. Would this game be better with a dragon in it? How to interpret this? You could do this game. I mean, it becomes Papo-Yo in a certain way. You could do this game where instead of externalizing the sort of inner demons as a third character, or creating a metaphor around like jumping off of the aerial, you could instead have there be a literal monster that either devours you when you get to the top of the mountain, or is sort of around or something. Like, you could, there's a thematic connection, and I think that is Papo-Yo. I think that, like, the tone that this game has, this sort of like bleak, rainy, foggy, English, abandoned, plague-ridden island. Like, I don't know. I think it's hard to reconcile that with a literal dragon. And so I think that you have to lighten some of that mood in a way that gets you closer to what Papo-Yo is doing in the favelas. I mean, obviously you don't have to set it in Rio de Janeiro or whatever, but I think you change the tone of the game in that direction by doing that. I think that certainly you could insert a dragon into the narrative, into the poetry, and it would serve the same kind of role that the biblical text serves currently. And that has the advantage of, I don't know what that biblical text means. Like, that is a reference that that is a reference. The biblical text is a reference, and you either have it or you don't. And I don't. And I can sort of pick up enough of what it's talking about that I can make some sense of it. I can have it sort of be thematically relevant. But I think that if you have that specific reference, or if you look it up and read through it, or read analysis of those biblical verses, then you get something specific out of those references that I didn't necessarily get. Whereas if you used a sort of language around talking about dragons and sort of monsters in a medieval, in a very familiar kind of a similarly obscure, ambiguous, medieval, fantastical, mythological sort of language structure, you could maybe do something very similar thematically with it that is not as reliant on biblical knowledge. So if for some reason you wanted to do that, I'm guessing that the biblical stuff is specifically important to the designers, and probably extremely meaningful if you have a good sort of reference for it. But I think that there would be sort of a trade-off. You could make an argument that that you could use a dragon as a fantastical creature in that way. You could leverage it in that way, and there would be advantages to that. So yeah, I'll say yes. Why not both? Let the dragon destroy Damascus. Totally, sure. That sounds good. Kyla's trying to understand Damascus for me. Most relevantly, I think, is that it has a prophecy about how it will be destroyed. Interesting. Yeah. Toby contributes, one source suggested it was a sign of the end times. And again, I feel like a dragon could take that role, could do that thing. So there we go. That's a good answer. I feel good about that answer. Okay. Thanks everybody. We're going to call it on that. Dear Esther, I'm really glad that we got to experience that. And I think it'll make an interesting sort of, informative background for playing Edith Finch. I am going to be on vacation next week, so no streams next week, but I should be back the week after. We'll play Edith Finch. We'll try that out. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Stay safe. Be well. Have a good weekend. I will see y'all next time. Bye.